The biggest misconception is that people often tie it to being sick or being elderly. And really, planning is for everybody. So when I go to different networking groups and things like that, and they say, "Oh, what's a good referral? What's a good client?" It's really anybody.
Right.
I always try to drive home the fact that once someone turns 18, nobody has the legal authority to step in on their behalf anymore.
All right. So we are inside the creator studio with Melissa of Cona Elder Law. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So what kind of inspired your legal journey, like overall?
So, really, I just always kind of knew that I wanted to go into law. When I went to college, I majored in philosophy, politics, and law
Mhm.
as my major. I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do, but growing up, I always volunteered at nursing homes and spent a lot of time with seniors and kind of always close to my heart. So the two kind of blended together, I guess. And I learned about elder law when
Mm.
I was in law school.
Oh, cool. So what is it that about like elder law in particular that kind of sets it apart from, say, like, private practice or something else like within the law field?
Yeah, so it's really its own animal. It's elder law and estate planning.
Hmm.
So we're able to really work with families from, very young families who are just starting out, have young children, all the way up through, retirement, end of life, and everything in between.
Hmm.
So it's really nice to be able to kind of work with families for long periods of time. And I've been with Cona Elder Law now 23 years. So
Wow.
I'm starting to kind of see that happen now, right? I'm,
Hmm.
I'm starting to kind of meet the children and the grandchildren, which is nice. But, it really kind of gives a different meaning to counselors at law, right? Because that's a term that people use instead of attorneys at law, because we really are helping people through stages of life, exciting stages of life and difficult stages of life.
Right. So I mean, Kona Elder Law kind of takes like a holistic approach. Can you kind of walk us through what that looks like for a client?
Sure. So when we meet with people, we're either meeting with individuals about their own planning for, estate planning or long care planning, or sometimes we're meeting with the adult children who are caring for an aging parent or caring for an aging loved one. And sometimes it's even people who are caring for a disabled child.
Mm.
Or any combination of those things. So, taking a holistic approach is really looking at the whole family, looking at the whole kind of family tree up the line and down the line, and how everything we're doing is going to impact everybody else.
Mm.
And it almost naturally happens that it's holistic, but
Right.
sometimes people do this in a vacuum and they're not really they're not really helping the client benefit from everything that they potentially benefit from.
Right. Okay. So I mean, you kind of mentioned that like planning is for everyone. So like not just the wealthy, like what are some of the common like misconceptions that people have about like estate planning and overall?
I think the biggest misconception is that people often tie it to being sick or being elderly. And really, planning is for everybody. So when I go to different networking groups and things like that, and they say, "Oh, what's a good referral? What's a good client?" It's really anybody.
Right.
I always try to drive home the fact that once someone turns 18, nobody has the legal authority to step in on their behalf anymore, which often surprises people, especially if they have children in college and
Hmm.
they're paying the bills and they're still doing everything. And I have a 15-year-old, and 3 years from now, if you tell me that she's going to do everything by herself, I wouldn't believe you. And
Hmm.
but that's legally that's what it is. So just making sure that an 18-year-old that's going off to college has a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy,
Mm.
where they name their parents to make healthcare decisions, to be able to get healthcare
Right.
information if there's an accident or something like that. Um, is so important. And then as people, start their families, if they have minor children, they need to make sure they have guardians appointed for their minor children if something happens to both the parents. So much of it has nothing to do with being sick and has nothing to do with being elderly.
Yeah.
So much of it is just, planning and having a good, you know, having a good set of ideas in place to know what you want to happen
Yeah.
in the event of a crisis or an emergency.
Well, it's definitely better to do it ahead of time so that way when the emergency happens, you're not suddenly realizing that at the hospital that you don't have the ability to know what's going on with your 19-year-old that got sick at college or something like that.
Exactly. Or you get the phone call and there's no way to get information. You get a phone call from a roommate. I mean, we've heard all, the horror stories, but it's really important. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions is people say like, well, I'm fine, so I'll do that later,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes you can't do it later.
Yeah.
If there's an injury or an accident, something that causes an incapacity, a mental incapacity, you can no longer sign those documents. So planning before like you said, the emergency or the crisis is ideal.
Yeah. Can you tell us about a time when poor planning kind of like came up, maybe in like a recent time or just something that like really stands out to you?
Yes. I have a story I tell often. It was for her mother to do planning. And the reason why they were coming to me was because the woman's mother and father had been divorced, and the father had recently passed away. And he left it was about $250,000 to his disabled grandson. And he felt, according to his daughter, who I was meeting with, very strongly about trying, helping out his daughter and her husband and helping out the grandchild because he was going to need a lot as time went on. And so he just left $250,000 to his disabled grandson. But an individual who is disabled and collecting benefits, whether it's Social Security, Medicaid, they can't have that kind of money in their name. And if they do, there's not much in the way of options. They can lose their benefits, or they can set up this special type of trust where the money can go, a special needs trust, and the money can be available for him for his life. But when he passes away, whatever's left has to go back to pay the state. And had his grandfather left it in his will and said, I'm leaving this money in a trust for my grandson, all of that could have been avoided.
Right.
So after having gone through that situation with the grandfather, this was the mom, bringing the grandmother in to make sure that her paperwork was set up appropriately so they didn't have to go through that
A second
again.
time.
Yeah. So that kind of always stands out to me because, when there's a disabled individual in the family and people, want to try to help out, they need to make sure they're doing it the appropriate way.
Yeah. Especially with like all the regulations and everything that the state and the federal government try to impose in some way, shape, or form, where some of them are like, they were good on paper, but then like in practice, when it impacts a real family where it's not $10 million, but it's just a small amount, but it's like even that, there's still rules and regulations that you have to follow. And if everything wasn't done to the T ahead of time, now they're realizing after the fact. So, I mean, one of the big questions is kind of like, what's the main difference between a trust and a will?
So a will is basically a document where you lay out what you want to happen with your assets when you pass away. So those are assets that are what we call probate assets. So assets that are not held with a joint owner, like you and your wife own a bank account. Something happens to you, it goes to her. She's the joint owner. Or you have an IRA that has a named beneficiary. Those are not probate assets. Those are assets that will just go to the beneficiary. But a will covers the assets that don't have that. You don't have the ability to either leave a beneficiary, or you just chose not to, or you didn't know you could, all of those things. So a will has to be probated, has to be filed with the court. And when someone passes away, you have to file the will and go through the process of probate, which can take some time, especially since COVID. Things have gotten, a little bit better, but they were very backed up for a while with the courts. So nobody really has access to those assets until the will goes through the process, through the probate process. A trust is a planning tool that also dictates how you want to leave assets when you pass away, but you transfer assets into the trust while you're alive. And so when you pass away, those assets just go directly to the beneficiaries without having to go through the process of filing with the court or doing any of those things and waiting on the court. Essentially, that money is available immediately to the beneficiaries. So a lot of people will choose to do trusts to make sure that their family can avoid that kind of more difficult piece when they pass away.
Yeah, and just the amount of time too, especially with like the cost of funerals nowadays and burial plot if they didn't plan ahead and purchase one, if it's an unexpected type of death, if you don't have these things kind of written down,
Hmm.
now you're figuring it all out over the course of months. And again, with the state and courts and back and forth and figuring out what was written down and what wasn't written down and what was spoken and what wasn't. So that's definitely like one of those things, especially the fact that a trust can go through right away. Now
Right.
you can pay for that funeral
Right. No
without
one's
having,
laying out the money and
yeah, and
yeah,
like, oh, I'm going to put it on a credit card and then like hopefully we get this solved in the next couple of months and I can get it
exactly.
back. So I mean, uh, so what kind of a mindset shift do you think is kind of important for people when they're thinking about like planning for the future overall?
I think that it's important for people to realize that everybody needs to have a plan, and it's just going to look different depending on where you are in your life. And it's when I work with people who are in a situation where there was no planning done, and mom is going into a nursing home tomorrow, kind of thing. We're piecing together a puzzle of things that have happened already, right?
Mhm.
So, they were paying the aid privately for so many years at home, and there's no paperwork and there's no documentation, and we're trying to, piece everything together. Whereas if you kind of shift your thinking to let me get this all in place now so that it's clean and it is clear, how money was spent and it's documented and everything is kind of tied in a nice package with a bow. It just makes it so much easier. It's not an easy time, right? When you're dealing with aging loved ones or people getting sick, and there's so much more to it. Like they even say with funerals, like people spend so much more money on funerals when they're doing it in a time of grief versus
Mhm.
pre-planning,
Right.
right? So it just makes it so much easier for the family and just better all the way around. So I think that people have this kind of thought where if I plan, something bad's going to happen, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's a huge shift that we need to see. We need to see people doing more of that. You plan for everything else, right?
Right.
You plan for a vacation, you plan for everything for the most part. So you should be planning for long-term care needs as well.
Is there kind of like a certain timeline, or do you think like whenever you make a big asset purchase or something in order to like update your will or to kind of make changes to a trust or something like that?
Yeah, so we usually tell people that they should revisit their documents maybe every 2 to 3 years,
Mhm.
which most people are not going to do, but you know, eh, really any sort of major life events would
Mhm.
be a good kind of indicator. So, getting married, having children, getting divorced, buying a house, starting a new job, maybe retiring, those types of things, those major life events. It's a good time to take a look at what you have and make sure everything is the way you want it.
Yeah, for sure. Um, So one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about is kind of like your YouTube series. I know one of the things that you do is just putting out a whole lot of information, education to the community at large. And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. It's Mondays with Melissa,
Hmm.
and I don't know. We started doing it a couple of years ago, and it's really funny. People like will come up to me at events, and be like, "Hey, you're you're Mondays with Melissa," but it's really just a very quick, 2 or 3 minute um, video every week of just something that's going on in the estate planning or elder law world, or just things that come up maybe even in a consultation that week that I'm like, oh, people really need to know about this, and it'll be a perfect time to just kind of jump on and tell everybody, remember this or don't forget to do this. And people really like it. It's quick, it's to the point,
Hmm.
and I do a lot of top 5 things or top 3 myths and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
No, those are really good because especially now in today's day and age on social media in particular, like the more information that you can get from someone, the more you'll trust them with the big decisions moving forward. If somebody just has an image on their website of who they are and like a little bio about them, it's hard to know like if that person is who they say they are to an extent or, how much they're going to be able to help you moving forward. But like when you put out that information, you answer essentially the frequently asked questions on a weekly basis. Now somebody knows, okay, this person is truthful. I feel like I know who they are. I see them, I hear them talking, and they're more comfortable with making that decision of going with you versus somebody else because they feel like they know you, even though they've never met you in person.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And there's so much bad information out there too. So I feel like, it's a little bit of a public service to get the right stuff out there.
No, that's for sure. It always depends on like who you talk to and how experienced they are and how much the research they're doing into new things that are coming out. Because I know with my personal field, things are changing all the time, and even though it may just be like a little change, especially in lawyerese, like that littlest change can have such a big effect on so many people just by making a couple of comma differences.
For sure. Absolutely.
So let's talk about the upcoming Caregiver Conference that's coming over in May. You want to talk about that a little
Yeah,
bit?
sure. So this is our ninth Caregiver Conference, Cona Elder Law's ninth Caregiver Conference. And every year it's kind of, the topics change depending on what's going on. And this year we're actually doing a panel and we're talking about retiring and rewiring. So we're going to have a panel of some pretty well-known individuals who have either retired well or have rewired because maybe they did retire, they were considering retiring, but weren't really ready. So they kind of changed things up a bit. And I'm also going to be speaking about planning in retirement, and we have a financial advisor who's going to be speaking a bit about retirement, funding your retirement, and kind of what's going on these days with all of that, and giving some recommendations and things. So it's going to be on May 7th at the Huntington Hilton, and it's from 5 to 9. We have some great exhibitors, maybe about 35 to 40 exhibitors, different vendors, dealing with retirement. And, we're really hoping that we have a nice crowd.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean that there's so many different things, and especially now with, to an extent, like the stock market changing on an hourly basis, it seems like, in drastic swings. There's a lot of people that just are, I don't know which way to go. And I also see a lot of in different fields and different types of people that once they retire, it's almost like the boredom kind of sets in. And then it's like, well, what do I do with myself? I've been working so hard for so long, like head down, just like to the grindstone. Now, when I'm retired and that's not there, it's like, well, my time.
Yeah. And we hear that all the time from people that once they stopped, moving, they got sick or, things catch up. My mom always says you can't hit a moving target. Things catch up with them. My father retired 3 times because he just wasn't ready. And, it's the free time, it's the socialization, going to work every day and seeing people every day. And there's a lot that changes. So I think that people are looking at retirement very differently these days, and we thought it would be a great topic to bring to people.
That's awesome. One of the things that I want to know, what is kind of like the weirdest thing that you've ever seen in a will?
Oh boy. I don't think it's weird. I don't think it's weird.
Well, maybe not weird, but just like most out there of like important to that person.
Yeah,
that they felt the need to put it in there.
I think what shocks a lot of people is what people do for their pets. I personally don't think it's weird because I love my dog. But yeah, I mean, there are people who will create pet trusts, making sure that there's money set aside for somebody to care for their pet. To make sure their pet gets everything that they've always gotten while the owner was alive. And it's funny because some people are just so passionate about it, and some people are so just baffled by the whole thing. It's funny to kind of see the difference in people. But I would say that that's probably the one thing that shocks a lot of people is what some people will go out of their way to do for their pets.
No, I love my dog. I would absolutely do a number of different things to make sure that she was taken care of because, especially for the animals that take care of us and also like the elderly, if they
Hmm.
have an animal, that animal is their best friend who's around them
Thousand
all
percent.
day, every day. So, I could definitely see that. Um, how does your firm kind of help families like navigate the complex issues when it comes to like Medicaid eligibility, guardianship, and kind of like losing the sight of like the emotional side?
Yeah, so there's emotion in all of it. And it is sometimes it's, families who don't get along and they're trying to take care of a parent, but they can't see eye to eye on anything, and the parent gets lost in the
Shuffle.
conversation,
Hmm.
right? And I actually became certified as an elder care mediator because there was so much. Not that I don't necessarily do mediation, but every consultation is something, whether it's a husband and wife or it's kids. But there's so much emotion in all of it. So it's important to be able to kind of access that part of your personality. You can't put somebody in a room with people going through that emotion that's not able to kind of take them through it,
Right.
right? And we, we pride ourselves on the fact that we can really listen and and talk to people and counsel them and try to help them understand that this is about mom or dad and what they feel or what happened when they were kids and why they don't get along doesn't matter, and try to kind of walk them in the right direction. And we have tons of resources. We have a resource center in our office. So if somebody does need, mediation, or they need a social worker, or they need a home care agency or anything, pet therapy, we have all of those resources available. So we really try to help people kind of get past whatever those issues are, help them get through it really
Hmm.
more than past it, and help them however we can.
Yeah, and at least for the sake of that situation,
Yeah.
like you're not trying to heal an entire
No, you
lifetime of
can't.
trauma, but it's more of just like, okay, let's separate that from this. Right now, your parent is sick.
Right.
This is what we need to do moving forward,
Right.
excluding everything that happened prior to today,
Yeah,
essentially.
absolutely. I met with a family the mother had passed away, and they brought me the will, and they said, "You're gonna read the will." Like that's not a real thing, You always see that on
Movies,
TV,
yeah.
right? The reading of the will. And I was like, "Well, no." I was like, "We'll just go through and we'll talk about it." And the mother had attached a note to the will, and they were like, "You need to read this," and it was sealed. And I
Hmm.
was like, I don't need to read it. You guys can read it. And they're like, no, we want you to read it. And it was like a note from their mother to them. And it was like, well, you're reading this, I'm dead. Like it's literally how it started. And by the time I was done, we were all crying. It was just beautiful. But like, I've never had to do that before in
Right.
my whole career. Like they insisted that, it be read by somebody that wasn't one of them.
Hmm.
And it was like, this is why I love what
Yeah.
I do. Just kind of being part of something like that.
For sure. And that's where, like, again, to an extent, for I would say probably a good portion of what you do, like you're showing up, people are seeing you at some of the hardest times of their
Mhm.
life. So, to be able to help them out in any way, shape, or form, and like to be that shoulder
Yeah.
that can help them through and all right, figure out this is what you need to do in 1, 2, 3 steps. And that's how we're going to move past this particular moment
Yep.
in time.
Yeah. I always say the best consultations are when we walk out and the client says, I feel so relieved.
Hmm.
That's kind of but then I go home and my husband's like, why are you so tired? You sit at a desk all day. I'm like, no, I'm emotionally exhausted.
Yeah, no, mental exhaustion takes a whole lot out of you,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially when you're literally problem solving,
Yeah.
on a daily basis of like, okay, so this is a different situation than this situation, even though they're looking for the same thing. So it's just like, how do I solve this problem?
Yeah.
And creative, but within a box.
Right.
And
Right.
that's what I kind of go through even with my stuff. It's just that like you have to be creative within that box, and that takes a lot more out of you because you're trying to exhaust every inch of
Yep.
that box and
And
be able
find the best resolution. And no two cases are ever the same.
No.
Ever. You know, there's always some sort of, and it's funny, I'll be sitting with clients and they'll go through this whole thing and I'm like, do, and I know what I'm doing in my head. I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. And they're like, and then I have to tell you about whatever it is. And
Yep.
I'm just like,
They drop
okay,
that on you.
scribble that all out and
Yep.
start over. Yeah, there's always a, and then
There's always that. So I mean, are you guys just in New York, or can you like assist people in other states, or how does that kind of work for you?
So we're mainly New York. We have an office in Melville. We have an office in Port Jeff. We have space in the city we can use. We do have a few attorneys that practice in New Jersey as well, but we have relationships with elder law attorneys all over. So we can, you know, get people the resources that they need. A lot of times if we have like snowbirds, you know, we have an attorney in Florida that we work with, just trying to make sure that everybody's taken care of wherever they are.
Yeah, because that's always one thing that like the kids are here and then the parents are down in Florida. And then it's like, how do the communication is always like one step removed because especially when there's multiple siblings, you know, because then everybody's hearing it from one sibling and then they're playing telephone and then they hear things in their own way and then they misinterpret and then like, you know, animosity can easily be created just by lack of communication.
For sure. And that's why we love Zoom these days, you know, because we can get everybody kind of in the room. And we don't have to worry about the game of telephone, but, you know, it certainly does happen.
Yeah, for sure. What do you kind of hope that listeners can take away from this episode?
Well, I hope people kind of get to know me a little bit, get to know the firm a little bit, and really, you know, drive home the point that everybody needs to have a plan, and everybody's plan just looks different. I have a webinar coming up, I think, on Friday of, you know, planning in every age and every stage. It just looks different, but everybody needs to have a plan.
Cool. All right. I really appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for having me.